Ganyu is an insane powerful crowd DPS. She deals a lot of AoE crowd damage from her charge attacks. Her burst summons a massive field, also dealing more AoE crowd damage. And most importantly, she has one of the most aesthetically pleasing designs. In today's video, we're going to be breaking down Ganyu's kit and talents, and of course whether she is worth pulling for your accounts or not. Alright, let's do this. Hey yo, what's going on guys? Welcome back to another Genshin Impact video, and today, as you can see, we got Best Girl here.
Oh, wonderful.
That's the wrong Best Girl. I'm talking about this girl right here, and today we're going through my builds. Alright, let's go through them. So, there's two different builds that I'll go over in today's video. So we're going to start off with the build that I've currently equipped on Ganyu, and then we'll showcase the other build after. So, here are the stats, and you may have noticed some differences. So, crit rate is 51%, and crit damage is at 246%. So, this is not the freeze build. This is actually the melt build, which I'll explain why her crit rate is quite low, instead of the freeze build where you can minimize her crit rate as much as you can. And the elemental mastery is decently high. The attack, I wish it was a bit higher, but then again, for this team, I kind of do rely on Bennett's buff to boost her overall attack. And again, I'll explain the reason why I built Ganyu this way. Now, moving on to her talents, like everybody else, she has normal attacks. However, it's just completely irrelevant because her main appeal of her kit is her charge attack damage. So, going to her charge attack, she has one of the most unique charge attacks in the game, one of the few rare characters that has two different types of charge levels. The first charge level is just being the standard charge attack, where the second one, she shoots out what is called a frost flake arrow, and once it makes contact to the enemy, it'll launch up in the air and deal AoE cryo damage. And as you can see, the damage multipliers here is quite a lot. That's why you definitely want to be spending a lot of time on Ganyu on field whenever you're using her charge attacks, because this, again, is where majority of her damage comes from. And this has such insane raw damage multipliers, which is why you want to be spamming her charge attacks as much as you possibly can, while also protecting her defensively, which we will get right into with her elemental skill. Her elemental skill is basically a way for her to get away in range of combat, because it summons in taunt, and that'll taunt your nearby enemies, while Ganyu can just shoot away from farther range. It also does generate orbs too. Overall, it's a nice ability, and it's not that big of a deal. Her elemental burst is actually kind of nice as well. One of my favorite abilities in the game. Basically, it summons a giant massive field dealing AoE crowd damage. I believe it summons about 50 cryo shards in general, so that's a lot of cryo application and damage in general too. And yeah, it's a lot of majority of her damage does come from her elemental burst as well. However, it's not as much compared to her charge attacks, because that's where a majority of her damage comes from on field. But her elemental burst is quite nice to be using regardless. Her kit overall is very simple, so let's actually move on to more what's important, which is her passives. So first Ascension passive, basically as soon as she shoots her Frost Flake arrow, that means level 2 charge, her crit rate of the subsequent Frost Flake arrows and their resulting bloom effects is increased by 20% for 5 seconds, which is good. That's why my crit rate, as you can see, as of right now, is 51%. At least, I would say the threshold minimal for melt builds is 60% crit rate. So then, at least, you can get up to 80% crit rate whenever you're using this passive for her. 20% crit rate, that's already really good. Now for her second passive, Celestial Shower grants 20% crowd damage to active party members in the AoE. So this is really good. This also makes her very good for more of like a cryo buffer in general. So if you do run another cryo sub DPS, like for example, Ayaka, Rosaria, Chongyun, Shenhe, whatever, right? They will take advantage of this because Ganyu will be constantly summoning her elemental burst, unless you are doing a particular build like what I'm using right now, which again, I'll explain all of this in a second for gameplay wise. And then for the exploration passive, it's just crafting bow type weapons will give you 50% of the ore used in return. And for the talent level priority, it's going to obviously be for those, I guess, who didn't catch on. It's going to be the charge attack, normal attacks first, right? Obviously, because that's where majority of her damage comes from. Then her elemental burst and her elemental skill. For how many levels you want to go for, I would at least try to get this as high as you possibly can. If, you know, the highest is level 8, then that's fine. But this is one of the rare few abilities where it's actually quite worth it to crown and stuff, because all the damage multiplies here for her charge attack is pretty high. And then for her elemental burst, probably like from level 6 to 8. And then for skill, you can keep it around like 5 to 6, because skill doesn't really do that much. Alright, now we go on to the constellations. So we got herself some constellations, and also probably more well-known about Ganyu is how strong her C6 is. But we'll start with the first one here, and then we'll progressively obviously go through C6. So C1 is actually really nice. I think it's kind of underrated from Ganyu, but as soon as she fully charges her Frost Flake arrows, your opponent's cryo resistance will be decreased by 50%, which is very good. That's really nice. And also generates 2 energy for Ganyu. This effect can only occur once per charge to level 2 Frost Flake arrow. regardless if the frostflake arrow itself or its bloom hits the target. So your first charged shot will be decreased crowd resistance for 6 seconds. Very nice constellation. C2, it's kind of whatever, but then again, this will make sense once we progress all the way to C6. But basically, it's an extra elemental skill. C3 is 3 levels up to her elemental burst. Overall, nice DPS, right, for her elemental burst. C4 is after opponent standing within the AoE of the elemental burst takes increased damage. This effect strengthens over time. Increased damage taken begins at 5% and increase by 5% every 3 seconds up to the maximum of 25%. The effects linger for 3 seconds after the opponent leaves the AoE. So overall, great DPS for elemental burst, but this is more for those who wants to be prioritizing her elemental burst damage, which I would personally recommend more for the freeze type of builds for Ganyu, and that's when it can get some value out of this constellation. But overall, it's kind of an okay constellation unless you are using a burst. 3 levels up to her elemental skill from C5 and C6. This is where her gameplay changes. Basically, after using her elemental skill, the next frostflake arrow shot will be charged completely. You don't even have to hold it. So as soon as you use your skill, just boom, automatically shoot your fully charged frostflake arrow, which is ridiculous. The amount of DPS you can deal in seconds, because from C2, where you will gain 2 free elemental skills for free, then you basically get like 2 free fully charged stacks. So the combo I would usually go with if I had this constellation is just go 1 charge stack first, decrease the resistance, then after that elemental skill, charge, and that's it. That is 3 charge attacks all at once. That is an insane amount of damage, unless you just completely miss. But that is an insane amount of crowd DPS that she could deal, which does, I would say, change her playstyle more from a main DPS to more of a quick swap DPS, which does make her a lot of fun to actually play. So overall, constellation wise, I would say Ganyu is already like insanely powerful because majority of her damage multipliers are at base, so you don't need any of her constellations. However, if you are a Ganyu enthusiast, which I respect, then Constellation 6 is where her best constellation at. But for those who just wants like a budgeted build, then I would just probably stop at C1 and you don't need the rest of here. Unless, you know, even in general, I would even spend on constellations unless you are, you know, going for C6. But, you know, that's already like an expensive investment. So this is more for like a whale territory, unless, you know, you are okay with that. So Ganyu overall already pretty insane at C0, but, you know, for those who are interested, then C6 is probably the best constellation, and the C1 is the stopping point. Okay, so now on to the artifacts and weapons. So I'm gonna start off with weapons. So, because weapons, there's a lot of options she could use. Almost most probably still one of her overall best DPS weapons to use. There are other weapons that she could use, but it really depends on what kind of build you're using. Like I heard Polar Star is insanely good for the freeze build, or Tainari's bow is great for Ganyu's melt build. So overall, there's many different type of special weapons that Ganyu could use, which does make her flexible in terms of using her gear. Now, for free-to-play players, I would recommend to use the Prototype Crescent, which is the free-to-play craftable bow that you could use for Ganyu. Basically, when you hit a weak spot, then you'll be able to get an attack and increase movement speed. So it's really nice buffs overall for Ganyu, which is really helpful. Or there's an alternative option that you could use called the Hamayumi Bow, which is a craftable Inazuman weapon. This increases her charge attack damage, but it also has this exchangeable passive where whenever you reach at 100% of her elemental burst, this effect increases double the effect. So basically, you want to not use her elemental burst while using this bow, which means that this is more for those who are going for a melt build instead of a freeze build. Because freeze build, you usually want to use her elemental burst because more crowd damage application. But for a melt build specifically, Ganyu kind of rarely uses her elemental burst unless you just so happen to have it and you just use it again. So that are my recommendations for free-to-play bows. Other than that, there are some other options she could use as well. For a 3-star weapon, I would probably recommend the slingshot, because slingshot offers crit rate. Also, you know, with the passive here, if you do any of these, which Ganyu does, increases damage overall, which is a solid weapon you could use. Other than that, for support builds, like just purely a sub DPS elemental burst Ganyu build, you can use like Favonius. You can also use Stringless. Those are the top 2 I would probably recommend the most in terms of, you know, just a support Ganyu build. If you do have LG for the end, though, that's also a great weapon to have for her. If you just, you know, so happen to be a whale, that's also a great weapon option for her. And for 5-star weapons, Skyward Harp is still a good option for her. It's not the best, but it still offers like the stats she needs, which is crit rating, extra crit damage, always useful to have. And in the other bows as well, like what I mentioned before, the more exclusive 5-star gotcha weapons, they are also great on her, but this will vary based on what builds you are going for. Now for artifacts, so I will talk about different kinds of build that you will use for her, because there's 2 builds that I mainly cover in this build, but there is also 3 you could say, but for now I'm just going to cover 2 main DPS Ganyu builds. So first off, as you can see with the build I'm going for is 4-piece Wanderers. This is more for those who are interested in the melt build, but there are many other artifact sets that could also substitute. It doesn't have to be Wanderers Trop, it could be any other sets that Ganyu has nowadays that she's a lot more flexible with compared to back then. Back then, Wanderers Trope was the only set for her, but now she has like 4-piece Shimenawas and 4-piece of the Gilded Dreams. There's a lot of options that she could use nowadays, but for now we're just going to talk about what I have here for stats. If you're gonna go for a Melt Ganyu, I will recommend a Elemental Mastery Sands, unless you don't have any other outside source for your team party to buff Ganyu's overall attack, then I will give her an Attack Sands. But if you have someone like Bennett, for example, that can buff Ganyu's overall attack, then I would just give her Elemental Mastery Sense for that extra reaction damage. And then for the Goblet, obviously it's cryo damage, and then for the Circlet, it's either crit rate or crit damage. Circlet, whichever crit stat you need the most to balance out the crit ratio. Now for the artifact sets, like what I mentioned before, 4-piece Wanderer is my personal go-to because it's unconditional effect. It is very easy. All you literally have to do is just charge attack, and that's about it. And since, you know, she is under the bow category, this artifact set works perfectly for her in her favor. However, there are many options as well. There are 4-piece Shimenawas. This build is basically to those who never wants to use her Elemental Burst, which does technically output a bit higher damage. However, you know, if there's some cases where you do want to use your Elemental Burst for what extra cryo application, then this set is not going to be the set that I would personally recommend. And also, you do need to maintain at least 15 energy to get the full passive effect for the 4-piece Shimenawa set. But it is still an overall great set to farm for because it is extremely resin efficient because it's a run alongside with the Emblem set, which is also another insane set to use. So overall, this is a good set for Ganyu too. I believe Gilded Dreams is also another option too because this buffs Elemental Mastery as well as attack based on your party members type, and you know, depending on what party members you have. Most of the times you're probably gonna just have Ganyu as your only cryo unit, so everybody else is not the same element as you, so which means that you're gonna be gaining a lot more Elemental Mastery rather than attack. So that's gonna be interesting, and you know, that'll be great for Ganyu, which will be able to buff a lot of Elemental Mastery. Depending on how much Elemental Mastery you have, let's say you have like about 400 Elemental Mastery and you have like 1600 attack. If that's the case, then I would probably replace the Sands with an Attack Sands, but overall, I would try to keep the attack range around like 1800 to 2000 if you can. That'll be great. And then the Elemental Mastery at least like 100 to 200, then that's around like the good spot for Ganyu's overall stats. And then there's way more sets too. Like I heard she could also use the 4-piece Tracy Bolai, although personally I wouldn't really recommend it, but you know, it's still a decent set that you could use on her. It's just basically, you know, whenever you have shield, you also get increased charge attack damage, which is, you know, not her strongest set, but it is also an option for those who has it. And then for the 2-piece effect, you can go like 2-piece Blizzard, right, for the extra crowd damage, and then 2-piece of either attack, EM, whatever, right? Any sets that has attack, EM also works just fine, and that's probably what I would recommend for the melt build. Now for the freeze build, it's actually a lot more different. She actually is restricted to just one set, and it is 4-piece Blizzard Strayer. This set is absolutely ridiculous on Ganyu. You literally need 0 crit rate. Like, most times, you're rarely gonna have that much crit rate on this build because she already offers a lot of crit rate. Plus, you're gonna be using Cryo Resonance, which already gives her a ton of crit rate. This also gives 40% extra crit rate when you freeze your opponent. So that is already a lot of crit rate, which is a insane set to use on Ganyu because you're just basically gonna be buffing as much crit damage and attack as possible. For the main set, it's gonna be Attack Sands, so I would probably recommend give her an Attack Sands. And then same thing for the Goblet and Circlet. Goblet will be crowd damage, and the Circlet will actually be crit damage. You're already gonna get 60% crit rate in base, so that's already more than enough crit rate for Ganyu's overall personal damage. Overall, I would just stick with crit damage Circlet, cryo Goblet, and Attack Sands. And then for the subsets, attack and crit damage. Now for her, I guess, other build that she could use, the more sub DPS Elemental Burst build. So this is more like what I wouldn't really recommend because, you know, Ganyu's charge attack is where the majority of her damage comes from. But if you are just so happy to use her as a sub DPS, or this is for more like, you know, for those who has LG for the end, then you can also use like a lot of other builds that you could use as well. Like 4-piece Emblem is a decent build where she just basically buffs her Elemental Burst damage. She can also use 4-piece Noblesse, where if you don't have a 4-piece Noblesse user, you can also buff your teammates or your carries attack, which is great after you use her Elemental Burst. So not only does she buff cryo, she also buffs attack, which is already a lot of, you know, value from that. And the list just goes on. If you just want to buff her overall Elemental Burst damage, for the 2-piece set effect, I would just go for 2-piece Noblesse and 2-piece of Blizzard Strayer. Alright, so that is my recommendation for Ganyu's overall builds. Now, on to the team compositions. Alright, so now we're going to first start off with the Melt team first, and then we're going to go straight into the Freeze team after. So Ganyu's Melt team, basically the fundamental is you want a Pyro applicator that's constantly applying Pyro. My number one recommended character to get on Ganyu's team is to always have Bennett to boost Ganyu's attack, and also to be a good energy battery for whatever Pyro applicator you decide to use, unless you're using a Dendro character. And also heals, which is very great for Ganyu's overall flex. Then going on to the next team slot, I would either recommend another Pyro character, so either like Xiangling. She's also free to play, so everyone has access to her. Another option you could use is someone that can also be constantly dealing Pyro reactions is a great idea. So like swirling with Pyro, for example, while infusing with Kazuha's elemental bursts, or you can use like a burning reaction, which has been a great trend for Ganyu's thing lately. However, the best character for that, for the Dendro burning reactions overall, well, which is no surprise, right, which is Nahida, which she has constant Dendro application. Her Dendro application is extremely lenient, so it's really easy. You can trigger it every single time. Also, her elemental burst does give extra EM to Ganyu, which is always super helpful. And yeah, overall, she's just super easy to use. That's why I like using her personally with my new Ganyu's Melt team. And then for the flex slot, I would usually offer like a defensive flex, just so that Ganyu doesn't get interrupted with her charge attacks, because like what I said before, Ganyu's charge attacks is where majority of her damage comes from. So Zhongli, in my opinion, would be the best option for this, because his shield decreases resistance. We all know this already. He's a universal resistance shred, and it shields the tankies in the game. But if you don't have Zhongli, there are other options as well. There are more crowd shooters as of nowadays. We have Diona, which is another great character to use for Ganyu, especially if you ever C6, where she can boost elemental mastery, and also she heals if you really need it, then that's fine too. But mainly just a shield, right, to protect. And you also have Layla, where Layla has a crowd shield. She has some pretty decent shield as well, also extra crowd application, but mainly just there for the shield. There are other options you could use as well, or like I guess Yanfei, if you have her at Constellation 4, where basically she has another build option where she can make herself a tank shield build instead, then that's also a great option to use. There's a lot of options for shields, but mainly just someone that could shield up Ganyu's interruption is all that matters in my opinion, because Ganyu's charge attack is where she is the most vulnerable at, especially when she's in close range. That is my take for the Melt teams. And this is my overall favorite team to use on Ganyu, because, well, Nahida and plus Bennett, these two will buff Ganyu's over damage plus the extra burning reaction, and Zhongli from protecting Ganyu's charge attack. But there's many options you can do, there's many variations you can do, but there's just, you know, this is my old favorite team that I used to use as well, where you can use Xiangling, and that works fine as well. Now onto the Freeze team. This team is what I would personally use for Freeze. This is for outputting the most damage that you can do for Ganyu. Obviously, everything else here are all flex. The main fundamentals you need is obviously, well, you need a Hydra character, someone that can apply off-field Hydra, which would either be, as if I could think of, Mona if you have, or Kokomi. If you don't supposedly have it, then you could also, I guess, go Xingqiu. He wouldn't be the greatest, especially since, you know, his elemental burst triggers by normal attacks, but if this is the only thing you have, this is also an option you could use. You could also use Barbara too, but just her Hydra application isn't as great compared to Xingqiu, but if you do need a healer, then Barbara is also an option that you could use as well. And then for the flex slot, I would either grab an animal character for your support, so Venti would probably be best for this team, but if you're going for overall, like, just buffing damage, Kazuha is also a great option as well. If you do have Sucrose, that's also another option. She's great for CC, and also at C6, she buffs extra crowd damage bonus when you infuse with crowd with her elemental burst. Very nice support. And just basically any animal unit, mainly the Sucrose, Kazuha, or Venti, I would probably stay in that lane to buff Ganyu's damage, and also CC. And then for the last flex, I would recommend a crowd character, just because, you know, funnel crowd energy, as well as, you know, overall extra crowd damage, since you're going to be boosting crowd damage with this team. So you can do Rosaria, or if not, you can also go for a defensive utility if you really need it, so like Diona again, Layla again. Both of these two are really great for Freeze team compositions as well. Shenhe is also an option, a pretty rare option because not a lot of people has her. She buffs crowd damage, also decreased crowd resistance. Overall, she's a great crowd buffer with some drawbacks. She has some rotational issues, a little bit of sometimes energy issues as well. But other than that, she's also a great premium 5-star support that you could use with Ganyu. This is the team I would personally go for. There's just a lot of variations you can go for. Mona being able to apply the Omen buff for your character, and that's just extra damage overall, and also Hydra application. And someone with the CC ability is great as well. And yeah, this is the Freeze team I would go for. There's many other Freeze team options you could do, but as of right now, this is probably one of the best I could think of personally. So that is my teams for Ganyu, and we'll do a showcase on both of these Ganyu teams. Alright, so here is the Melt team showcase. So this is what I would go. Apply Nahida, use burst first. Then apply Bennett's burst, so everyone's burnt. And then charge attack right away. As you can see, you are just dealing insane amount of melt damage from here. If you need a reapplied pyro, just you spend it again and charge tag once again. And just keep reapplying everything. As you can see, dead. Already dead. Already dead. And just keep reapplying. And then we come here. Reapply. So now he's burning again. And simple as that. Simple as that. Alright, here we go. Last one. So, apply a cryo, right? Then have your animal character infuse their elemental burst. Then your crowd sub DPS or defensive crowd teammate. Then apply Hydro. And as you can see, with Mona especially, you're always having the constant ultimate buff. And as you can see, it's just being buffed constantly, and we're dealing extra freeze damage. You saw how all of our opponents just went away super quickly. One more time. And we're gonna demonstrate it one more time.
We're way behind schedule.
And that just wraps about Ganyu Showcases. As you can see, she's already tired as I am now. But for real though, as you can see, her damage is already pretty ridiculously high, pretty above average as well. And you know, the more teammates that you can get for her that supports Ganyu pretty well, you know, then obviously her personal DPS will be great. And she's also just convenient to have in exploration because you could just shoot far range and nearly one-shot enemies. It's just really nice, man. Now going off to the question of, is Ganyu worth pulling for your account or not? And the answer is... yeah, no duh, obviously. I mean, just look at her, bro. She's literally the best character in the game. I mean, just look at her, bro. She's literally has the best design in the game. I mean, obviously, do I have to even go back to my top 5 list on why? Okay, obviously, all jokes aside, though, Ganyu's damage overall is gonna be one of her main appeals. So if you do lack a crown damage dealer, then Ganyu is still a top 2 option that I would recommend for crown damage overall. However, as of right now, like what I said in the banners video, which you guys should check it out, I did say that cryo as an element isn't relevant because of Dendro's spotlight being, you know, shined upon since the Sumer update. So as of right now, cryo isn't that important, and you don't need to necessarily spend your gems on her. So that means she's not a must pull as much as she was back then. But if you do really need crowd damage, Ganyu is still one of the best in the game. Or if you prefer another crowd DPS's playstyle like Ayaka, then you can always just save for her as well. Missing out on Ganyu won't kill you, but Ganyu's value will be very nice, and I promise you that having Ganyu will be pretty nice to have on your account, and you'll enjoy her a lot. As you can see, she's extremely tired, so I'm gonna let her rest for a bit. So in that case, that is all I will do in this video. If you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure you guys hit that like button, as well as subscribe to the channel for more of this type of content. And yeah, I guess I wish to all my Ganyu mains out there or Guanchis out there good luck on pulling for her, and I hope she does bless your wishes, because damn, she is quite worth it to have. And that is all I got. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, until next time, stay epic and peace out.